welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're looking for that shortcut to being instantly well-informed about some of the strangest, most enduring cultural legacies of the 20th century, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Today, we are tackling a piece of social engineering that was so successful, so complete, that it literally rewrote the cultural calendar for one of the world's biggest nations.
We're diving into the history of the Russian winter holiday. Because if you look at Russia, or really any post-Soviet country today, you'll see something curious. December 25th. It's often just another Tuesday, a quiet, unremarkable working day.
But January 1st, Novi God, the New Year, that's a different story. It is the undisputed national climax. That's the day for the big feast, for the presents, the family gatherings. It is the primary emotional outlet for the entire year.
And we're looking at sources that argue this whole shift, this replacement of the religious Christmas with a secular, state-sponsored New Year, is one of the most successful social engineering projects the Soviet Union ever pulled off.
And it's one of the most resilient, too. I mean, think about it. The Soviet Union itself collapsed.
Right.
But this holiday tradition, it did not. It's still there.
It's an extraordinary paradox. And that's really the core mission of this deep dive, to unpack how the Soviet state managed this. It wasn't just about banning a religious holiday. They tried that, and it failed spectacularly.
It was a disaster.
This was something else. This was what our sources call a hostile takeover of the holiday's entire psychological machinery. They seized the symbols, they repurposed all the emotions, and they redeployed every single piece of it for their own socialist ends.
Hostile takeover is the perfect term, because you're right, their early attempts to, just invent a new holiday from scratch, they were a total failure.
So they didn't invent, they appropriated.
Exactly. The success came from a process of symbolic projection. They took the things people already loved, the decorated fir tree, the magical gift giver, the big festive meal, and they stripped them bare of any theological content.
Just hollowed them out.
Completely. And then, step by step, they infused them with new, explicitly Soviet iconography and ideology.
So if the population has this deep, fundamental need for a midwinter festival of light and renewal, the state basically said, fine, we'll give it to you, but it's going to be on our terms.
And the loyalty will be redirected.
Yeah.
Not just away from the church and to the party, but from the whole spiritual realm to the material, the technological, the Soviet world.
It's genius. But to really get how they pulled it off so effectively, we have to look back. Because the Russian winter holiday was already, well, a little bit fragile, even before 1917.
Oh, it was on very shaky ground. It was an imported, politically vulnerable custom from the start.
Okay, so let's set the stage. We have to start with Peter the Great, because this is where the precedent for the state just messing with the holiday calendar really begins.
The Peter the Great precedent is absolutely crucial. It shows that for almost 200 years, the winter holiday was, first and foremost, a political tool.
Right. Before 1700, Russia wasn't on the same calendar as the West. The New Year was celebrated when?
On September 1st. It was tied to the Orthodox Church calendar and the agrarian cycles, the end of the harvest.
Which, to a Western European ear, sounds incredibly late in the year.
And that's exactly the point. Peter the Great saw that as just one more sign of Russia's backwardness. In his huge push to westernize the empire, he issues this decree on December 20th, 1699.
A historic decree.
It commands Russia to adopt the Julian calendar and, critically, to celebrate the New Year on January 1st, just like in Europe.
And he didn't just change the date. He was very specific about the aesthetic, right? What it should look like.
That's where the visual culture starts to get engineered. His decree commanded people to decorate their houses, their city gates, with branches of pine, fir, and juniper.
So exterior decorations, not the indoor tree.
No, not at all. This was a civic public display meant to mimic the customs he'd seen abroad. It was about creating a uniform Western-style streetscape.
But the crucial detail our sources bring up is that this greenery, well, it wasn't met with a lot of joy. The popular association with fir branches was actually pretty negative.
Profoundly negative. It's an amazing bit of forgotten history. Today we associate pine and fir with life, warmth, the holidays.
Of course.
But back then, in 17th century Russia, common people associated fir branches with two things: death and drunkenness.
Death. Ow.
They were used in funeral rites. Sometimes they'd lay them on the path to the grave. The other more common association was with taverns.
Taverns.
Yeah, they used a fir branch to mark the entrance to a drinking establishment, a kabak. So if you saw a fir branch over a door, it meant you could get a drink there.
So Peter the Great is commanding the population to decorate their homes with symbols they link to funerals and bars, and telling them it's supposed to be a joyous occasion.
Precisely. You can just imagine the resistance. It shows that tradition had no deep sacred roots in the culture. It was a top-down order, which made it fragile from the very beginning. Peter set the precedent. The state decides how and when you celebrate winter.
Okay, so that's the outdoor greenery. But the indoor decorated Christmas tree, the yoka, that's the real symbol the Bolsheviks went after.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
That was a much later import, 19th century. And it came from Germany, specifically through the German wives of the czars.
Aristocratic influence.
Entirely. The first really notable example was Grand Duchess Alexandra Fedorovna. She was a Prussian princess, and she brought the tradition to the imperial court in 1817, but just as a private family custom.
Which means, by the time we get to the revolution in 1917, the Christmas tree tradition is maybe 100 years old, and it's mostly an upper-class thing.
Exactly. It was seen as aristocratic, foreign, and this is key, before the revolution, it was explicitly religious. The decorations were basically a catechism lesson.
What do you mean?
Well, the tree would be topped with the 6 or 8-pointed Star of Bethlehem. There were candles to symbolize Christ as the light of the world, and apples to represent the Garden of Eden. The whole thing was centered on the Nativity.
And because it was seen as this foreign, aristocratic import, the seeds of its own destruction were already there. And they started to sprout, ironically, during World War I.
That's the critical foreshadowing. In 1914, Russia goes to war with Germany, and this wave of anti-German hysteria just sweeps the country. All of a sudden, the yoka, this pleasant courtly custom, is denounced.
And how high up did that denunciation go?
Right to the top. The Tsarist government, and amazingly, the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church itself, they both condemned the yoka as an alien German custom.
Wait, the church. The Orthodox Church helped delegitimize the Christmas tree.
They did. They basically set the precedent. They established in the public mind that this tree was not some sacred, ancient Russian object. It was a political football that the state could ban for xenophobic reasons.
So when the Bolsheviks come along a few years later,
The groundwork was already laid. They didn't have to invent the idea of banning the tree. They just had to swap out the charge from German to bourgeois and religious. The Tsarist regime itself had shown them how to do it.
so the table is set. The Bolsheviks take power, and their goal isn't just political. It's a total cultural revolution. They have this term for it, Bietat.
By it, the structure of daily life. They understood that if you don't conquer the private habits of the population, how they eat, celebrate, raise their kids, the revolution is never truly complete. And religion, especially Christmas, was a huge competitor. It was the opiate of the masses, maintaining the old bourgeois world. It had to go.
But they didn't start with an outright ban. The initial strategy in the early 1920s was, well, it was much weirder. Aggressive mockery. The Komsomol Christmas.
Phase 1, yes. Substitution through ridicule, organized by the Komsomol, the Young Communist League. They tried to replace religious ritual with revolutionary carnival, and they specifically targeted January 6th, Christmas Eve.
And these events, they sound less like political rallies and more like, well, organized riots.
They were shocking. Visceral spectacles designed to humiliate and desecrate. Komsomol members would stage these huge carnival-like parades. They'd dress up in grotesque costumes as clowns or bloated capitalists, or very often as caricatured drunk priests.
And they would burn things.
Oh, yeah. They carried these huge effigies of religious figures. And our sources say they were ecumenical in their scorn. They had Jesus, but also Buddha and Osiris. They'd parade them through the streets, singing the Internationale, and the climax was always a big public burning of the effigies and icons.
So while this is happening in the streets, the propagandists are putting out the argument that Christmas was just a recycled pagan festival anyway.
Right, that the church just co-opted the winter solstice to exploit the working class. But this whole strategy just backfired completely.
How so?
The party elites might have liked the iconoclasm, but the deeply religious peasantry and even a lot of urban workers, they just saw it as hooliganism. It was deeply offensive and totally counterproductive.
So much so that the party had to tell them to tone it down.
By 1923, the Central Committee realized that this aggressive mockery was just isolating the regime. It was creating this huge vacuum of joy and ritual with nothing to fill it. They realized you can't just take things away. The human need for ritual is too strong.
Which brings us to this great historical irony about Lenin himself.
It's fascinating. I mean, despite being the architect of state atheism, he seems to have had this early ambivalence toward the yoga. There are records that in January 1919, Lenin himself attended a children's New Year's party in Sokolniki in Moscow.
And there was a tree?
There was a decorated tree, and he was there handing out gifts to the children. So, initially the tree wasn't seen as public enemy number one.
It was maybe seen as a neutral aesthetic thing.
Exactly. But after Lenin died and Stalin consolidated power, that ambiguity just vanished. The window slammed shut, and that leads us straight into phase two, the Black Years.
Black Years. From 1929 to 1935, this is when Stalin launches the first five-year plan, forced collectivization, the Great Break. And this is total prohibition.
Total prohibition is the perfect term. In 1929, all religious holidays were officially abolished. But the attack went deeper than that. They tried to dismantle the very rhythm of human life by getting rid of the 7-day week.
The Neporivka. Explain what that was.
The Neporivka was the continuous work week. It was a 5-day cycle. The workforce was split into 5 groups, and each group had a different rotating day off.
So the factories never stopped.
The factories never stopped, and more importantly, Sunday was destroyed. The Christian Sabbath just ceased to exist as a shared day of rest and worship. It was just another work day for 80% of the population.
So Christmas wasn't just not a holiday, it was literally just a Wednesday or a Friday.
Exactly. And the yoga itself became illegal. It was now a political crime to have a tree. The state criminalized the sale of fir trees.
And how did they enforce a ban on something so private, so domestic?
With youth brigades. The Komsomol organized these light cavalry patrols. These were squads of young, fanatical communists who would just roam the streets. Their whole job was to peer into people's windows and report any family with an illicit tree.
That must have created this incredible atmosphere of paranoia.
Oh, complete paranoia. If you wanted to celebrate, you did it in absolute secrecy. You'd hang heavy blankets over the windows. You'd talk in whispers. It was this period of total cultural deprivation and fear.
And the propaganda was aimed directly at children.
Which is the most insidious part. Posters and magazines showed Ded Moroz, Grandfather Frost, as an ally of the priest and the kulak, the class enemy. There were slogans like, "Parents, don't confuse us, don't organize Christmas celebrations." The tree was called religious dope and a savage custom. This went on for 6 years, and the social cost was becoming enormous.
So that period of total negation, the Black Years, it just wasn't sustainable, was it? You can't just create a cultural void like that and expect society to function.
You can't. And the Stalinist leadership, for all their brutality, were pragmatic. They realized that a stable population, a productive population, needs emotional stability, and the lack of any winter festival was causing real social disorder. The decision to bring it back in 1935 was pure, calculated political stabilization.
So what was the specific context in the mid-30s that forced their hand?
The country was still just reeling from the trauma of the early 30s. You have the Holodomor, the catastrophic famine that killed millions. You have the chaos of forced collectivization. The regime was facing plunging birth rates, social dislocation, just a general exhaustion.
And this is the period historians call the Great Retreat.
Exactly. Stalin pivots away from the radicalism of the 20s towards a kind of neo-traditionalism. He starts strengthening the nuclear family. They made divorce harder. They banned abortion in 1936. And they started promoting this idea of Soviet respectability, clean, ordered family life.
And to sell this new vision, they needed to show that the system was working. They needed a tangible, emotional event that proved Stalin's famous line from that year.
Life has become better. Life has become merrier. It was a political command. You had to be merry. And the state realized it needed to provide a sanctioned, organized, and very visible source of joy that the government could take full credit for. A population under that much pressure needs a release valve.
And it's better to provide a controlled valve than risk an explosion.
That's the logic.
So how did they signal this massive pivot? It wasn't some big formal decree, was it?
No, the rollout was a masterclass in propaganda. On December 28, 1935, just 4 days before the New Year, a short letter appears on the front page of Pravda, the official party newspaper. The title was simple: "Let us organize a good yoga for the New Year for the children."
And the author of this letter, this is where the story enters the realm of profound, dark irony.
Pavel Pustyshov. He was the signatory. And his biography is just staggering. Postyshev was one of the highest-ranking, hardest-line Stalinists. He was notorious for implementing the harshest policies during the famine in Ukraine. He was directly responsible for mass suffering.
And he becomes the man who brings back the holiday, the Soviet Santa Claus.
Overnight. It's a chilling demonstration of the state's power, and the irony gets even darker. Postyshev, the man who returned joy to the children, was himself arrested and executed as an enemy of the people, a supposed Trotskyist spy less than 3 years later, in 1939.
He was purged, but his holiday survived him.
He was liquidated. His holiday is now celebrated by millions.
So what was the rhetorical trick in Postyshev's letter?
Yeah.
How did he justify bringing the tree back without admitting the original ban was a mistake?
He performed this brilliant maneuver we call the class reversal reframing. He didn't admit error. He blamed the ban on leftist distortion by overzealous local officials. Then he pivoted. He argued that in Tsarist times, the tree was a luxury only for the rich. The workers' children could only look on from the outside.
So the ban was wrong, not because it was anti-religious, but because it denied the working class something the rich had monopolized.
Precisely. He reframed the tree's return as an act of socialist justice. The party was now giving this pleasure to the proletariat as an entitlement. It wasn't a religious ritual anymore. It was a political reward for a triumphant working class.
And that's the moment they completely sever the linguistic tie as well.
The crucial linguistic pivot. He very specifically commands the organization of a New Year's tree, Novogodnaya Yolka. He does not use the old term, the Christmas tree, Rождественская елка. By anchoring the tree to the secular civil date of January 1st, they instantly destroyed its religious meaning.
And the speed of compliance. 4 days is nothing.
The speed showed the totality of Stalinist control. The letter from a Politburo member in Pravda wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Within hours, the ban on selling fir trees was lifted. Within days, factories were scrambling to make ornaments. The entire country's cultural focus shifted in less than a week. The state had successfully manufactured joy on demand.
Okay, so now we get into the nuts and bolts of the takeover. The specific mechanics of how they swapped out the symbols. Let's start at the very top of the tree. The star.
The star on the tree is the perfect illustration of this symbolic displacement. Traditionally, the Yolka had a 6 or 8-pointed star of Bethlehem pointing to the Nativity. It represented a celestial divine event.
And the Soviets replaced it with the 5-pointed red star, the symbol of the Red Army and the Communist Party.
And it wasn't just a generic red star. This is a fascinating detail. Many of the early toppers were explicitly designed to mimic the spectacular illuminated ruby stars that had just been installed on the towers of the Moscow Kremlin in the mid-1930s.
The ones that replaced the old Tsarist double-headed eagles.
The very same. So think about what that does. The child's gaze is no longer directed toward heaven or the Holy Land. It's directed toward Moscow, toward the central tower of the Kremlin.
The axis of the holiday literally shifts from the celestial to the geopolitical.
Exactly. The message is unmistakable. Light, guidance, hope. It all comes from the party headquarters in the capital. Salvation is in socialist progress, dictated from the Kremlin.
Okay, so below the star, we have the gift giver. They had to completely erase St. Nicholas, Sviatoy Nikolai. So how did they create their own version with Ded Moroz, Grandfather Frost?
They took a figure from deep Slavic folklore, Morosko, the spirit of the cold. And in the old folklore, Morosko was not a jolly, benign figure at all.
Not at all.
He was powerful, capricious, sometimes cruel. He was a force of nature that could freeze you to death if you disrespected him. He demanded offerings. He didn't give gifts.
So the state had to finish the job of softening him up, making him safe for a socialist party?
They fully secularized him, stripped him of any religious context. He became strictly a fairy tale character, this kind but strong grandfather who represented the powerful, controlled Russian winter, and they were meticulous about his look to make sure he wasn't confused with the Western Santa Claus.
What were the key differences?
Well, Ded Moroz is usually taller, leaner, more imposing. His robes were often blue or silver to reflect the ice and snow, though red was also used, of course, for the Soviet connection. And crucially, he drives a traditional Russian troika, a sleigh pulled by 3 horses.
No reindeer.
No reindeer. That was seen as European. This rooted him firmly in Russian national tradition. And later, they even gave him an official residence in Veliki Ustug in northern Russia to make him a homegrown hero.
But the most unique invention, the one with no Western equivalent, is Snegurochka, the snow maiden. Why was she created? What was her function?
Snegurochka is probably the most brilliant piece of social engineering in the whole holiday. She solved 2 huge problems for the state. child psychology, and ideological messaging.
Let's start with the psychology.
Ded Moroz, by design, is a big, powerful, booming figure. To a small child, he can be genuinely terrifying. You need a buffer. Snegurotchka, portrayed as this beautiful, smiling young woman, was the gentle mediator. She calmed the kids down. She led the games. She was the go-between.
And ideologically, she was the perfect archetype.
Oh, absolutely. She made her official debut at the big, template-setting 1937 Hall of Unions Yolka in Moscow. She was the picture of ideal Soviet youth. Healthy, active, organized, the perfect Komsomol girl.
She was the MC.
He was the official MC, and because she was the one leading the songs and dances, she became the perfect vehicle for delivering the scripted, ideological content of the party in a soft, friendly way. She made sure the kids got the message.
Which brings us to the parties themselves. These were not spontaneous fun. They were staged performances.
They were rigidly scripted morality plays, and the Moscow one set the standard for every school and factory in the country. The central plot was always a struggle for the new year itself.
What did that look like?
The joy of the new year would be threatened by villains, usually from Russian folklore Baba Yaga, the Grey Wolf. And these characters represented chaos, disorder. Implicitly, they were the wreckers and saboteurs that Stalinist propaganda was always warning about.
So Ded Moroz and the children had to defeat them.
Exactly. And their victory, the arrival of the new year, symbolized the triumph of socialist order and progress over its enemies, both internal and external.
And getting to go to one of these big parties wasn't a universal right. It was tied into the state's reward system.
That is so critical. The biggest, most spectacular party was the Kremlin Yolka. Tickets were like gold. And they weren't sold. They were given as rewards to the children of the party elite and, very importantly, to the children of shock workers.
People who overfulfilled their production quotas.
Yes. So this turned participation in the holiday into a direct reward for loyalty and hard work. It fully integrated the festive season into the state's apparatus of control and motivation.
So the ideological takeover wasn't just in the narrative. It was literally hanging on the branches of the tree. The state's light industry started pumping out ornaments that were basically a 3D timeline of Soviet achievements.
The Yolka became a teaching tool. They understood that the best way to get ideology into someone's head is to associate it with joy. So they replaced the angels and the shepherds with symbols of technology, militarism, and agriculture.
Let's track that timeline. What kind of ornaments are we seeing in the late 1930s, right after the tree comes back?
The late 30s were all about mobilization and technological pride. You see ornaments shaped like little paratroopers, zeppelins, Red Army slavers. It was a celebration of Soviet aviation and military strength.
Then the A1s bring World War II, and the tree becomes part of the war effort.
Absolutely. The ornaments reflect the home front. You get little glass tanks, pistols, even nurse dogs. And because resources were so scarce, a lot of wartime ornaments were made from scrap materials like painted light bulbs, which is its own kind of powerful statement.
The struggle of the nation right there in a fragile glass ornament.
Yeah.
And then we get to the 1950s and 60s, the Khrushchev era, which gives us some of the most iconic and frankly weirdest pieces.
The Khrushchev era ornaments really show the two main obsessions of that period: agriculture and the space race. So suddenly your tree is covered in glass corn cobs.
Corn cobs.
Corn cobs, bunches of grapes, other fruits and vegetables. This was a direct celebration of Khrushchev's often disastrous corn campaign, presented as a symbol of socialist abundance.
And right next to the corn, you have the new icons of scientific faith.
The new icons. Rockets. Okay. Sputniks. And the beloved cosmonauts. This was the ultimate symbolic displacement. A child looks up at the tree and sees a cosmonaut ascending in a rocket proof of Soviet scientific triumph. That's the miracle now, not the nativity. Technology had officially replaced theology.
So the tree becomes this constantly updated physical report card for the state, reinforcing whatever the current party line was.
That's it, exactly. It guaranteed that the happiest moment of a child's year was permanently associated with Soviet progress, whether that meant industrialization or space exploration.
Okay, let's move from the tree to the table. The New Year feast, the Notogadnya Zastolye, was maybe even more important because it had to fight the daily reality of the economy of shortage.
The feast was everything, and it was entirely shaped by the command economy. For most Soviet families, the most important holiday ritual was getting the zakaz, the order.
Explain what the zakaz was.
Because grocery store shelves were usually empty of anything good, the zakaz was a special ration package you got through your workplace. It was the only way for most people to get the ingredients for a real feast. It would have things you could never find otherwise. Smoked sausage, sprats, good chocolates, maybe some Indian tea.
So the feast was a temporary, state-sponsored simulation of abundance.
It was a vital psychological release. For one night, the table was full. It simulated the material success that socialism always promised but rarely delivered. And receiving the zakaz reinforced the idea that the state, through your job, was the true provider of all good things.
And the centerpiece of that table, the dish that really tells the whole story of the Soviet project, is salad olivier.
The story of salad olivier is the story of democratizing aristocracy through substitution. It was invented in the 1860s by a French chef in Moscow for a super elite restaurant. The original recipe was insane grouse, veal tongue, crayfish tails, pressed caviar.
A world away from the modern version. So how did Soviet housewives adapt it?
They systematically replaced every single unobtainable ingredient with something that was mass-produced and available. The grouse became Doktorskaya Bologna, a soft sausage that was supposedly healthy enough for doctors to recommend. The crayfish tails were replaced with canned green peas.
So the basic structure remains, but the ingredients are totally proletarian.
Exactly. And the key ingredient holding it all together was mayonnaise. The state actually promoted mayonnaise production heavily in the late 30s as a sign of modern industrial food processing. So the whole dish became a symbol of modern, high-calorie, socialist plenty.
And we have to talk about the tangerines. Why are tangerines so powerfully linked to the Soviet New Year?
The smell of tangerines is probably the most potent sensory memory of the holiday for anyone who grew up in the USSR. They were sourced from the Soviet subtropics Georgia, Abkhazia, and they happened to ripen in midwinter.
So in the dead of a Russian winter, they were often the only fresh fruit you could get.
The only burst of color, the only fresh scent. They came to symbolize the vastness of the Soviet Empire, the state's ability to bring the sun and warmth of the South up to the frozen North.
And finally, the secular sacrament of the night, Soviet champagne.
The ultimate democratization of luxury. Champagne was the drink of the czars. Starting in the late 30s, the state launched mass production of Sovetskoye Champanskoye using a new rapid fermentation method. It made this once aristocratic drink affordable for everyone.
So the popping of the cork at midnight replaces the sound of the church bell.
It became the secular sacrament, the mandatory sound of collective socialist joy. Toasting the new year with a glass of mass-produced champagne became the ritual that sealed the celebration, perfectly replacing any old religious observance.
So by the mid-30s, the holiday is fully engineered. But there's one last piece of the puzzle, the calendar disconnect that created a very strange reality of 3 different winter dates that still exists today.
This is the legacy of the Bolsheviks' decision back in 1918 to adopt the Gregorian calendar, to align with the West. The Russian Orthodox Church, however, refused to accept this godless calendar and stuck with the old Julian calendar, which lags 13 days behind.
Which created 2 parallel timelines for celebration. Let's just walk through the dates for everyone because it gets confusing.
Okay, so you have December 25th on the Gregorian calendar. In the USSR, just a normal workday. Then January 1st, Gregorian. That's the big one, the official Soviet New Year.
The main event.
The main event. Then you have January 7th, that's Orthodox Christmas. It's December 25th on the old Julian calendar. It was celebrated very quietly, if at all. And finally, you have January 14th.
The old New Year.
Stary Novi God, which is January 1st on the Julian calendar.
That old New Year is such a fascinating phenomenon. It's not an official day off, but so many people celebrate it. What role did it play?
It became an essential cultural safety valve. The official New Year on January 1st was mandatory, public, loud. It involved toasts to the leadership and boring official speeches on TV. It was full of state pressure.
And the old New Year was the opposite.
It was the opposite. It was a quieter, more intimate, slightly subversive bookend to the season. It was a second chance to celebrate, a nod to the pre-revolutionary past, but without any of the political pressure. It was for family. It was private.
That duality really captures the whole Soviet experience, doesn't it? The mandatory public performance and then the small private space you carve out for yourself.
It really does.
And the ultimate proof that this whole project worked is what happened after 1991. The Soviet Union collapses, the party disappears, but the Soviet New Year is still standing.
It's the final, undeniable triumph of the engineering project. They so successfully attached the rituals, the tree, the feast, the gifts to a secular date and saturated them with childhood memories that the tradition became indestructible.
So even with the revival of the Orthodox Church, the cultural hierarchy never flipped back.
Not at all. The New Year is still the undisputed king of the holidays in the post-Soviet world. It's the biggest party, the biggest emotional moment. Orthodox Christmas on January 7th is a public holiday now, which is a big deal, but it's still just a religious echo that comes after the huge secular shout of the New Year. The structure they built proved more resilient than the political system that created it.
The cultural habit is stronger than the ideology.
Cultural habit is one of the most powerful forces there is. And the Soviet architects understood that it's much easier to change the meaning of a symbol than it is to get rid of the human need for the ritual itself. So this whole deep dive into Novi God is just a powerful case study in how power and culture work. It shows that it is so much easier for a state, or any cultural force really, to perform a hostile takeover of rituals people already love than it is to invent new ones from scratch.
Right. The Bolsheviks learned that creating a cultural vacuum just leads to instability.
Exactly. By keeping the structure of joy, the lights, the feast, the family time, but completely changing the content, they guaranteed the tradition would survive them.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you maybe think about your own holiday traditions. If the deep psychological need for a midwinter festival is really just about light, renewal, and family stability, and if a powerful institution like the state can successfully supply the symbols for that need, even politically charged ones like a red star or a corn cob, does the original theological root even matter in the long run? What does the enduring power of this cultural habit tell us about how easily our deepest needs can be redirected by a clever political architect? That's something to consider over your own festive meal this year.